Hey there, friends. Welcome to Jumble Think. My name is Michael Woodward. I am your host, and we are the show that talks about how idea makers, creators, how innovators and influencers take those ideas and dreams and turn them into reality. Now, our guest on today's show is no stranger to the Jumble Think podcast. His name is Erwin McManus. Last time he was on the show was back in episode 213, which was in February of 2019, talking about some things he was working on. Now, today, here we are a few years later, episode 394 and almost to 400. We're getting there. We're getting close. But he is here to talk about some new exciting things he's working on. Not only is he a pastor, not only is he an author, not only is he an influencer, not only is he a fashion designer, but he's also doing some unique and cool things in the city of LA and beyond. So he has a new book out today, actually, releases today. It is called Mind Shift. And really, really, really great book. It is about how the mind shift, it doesn't take a genius to think like one and how we can reshape our thinking. We're going to talk about that book, but we're also going to be talking about a new program he has out called The Arena. And it is a fascinating program. So we're going to get into that in a moment. So as you watch, as you listen today, I want to encourage you, go check out what he's doing, erwinmcmanus.com. We'll have the episode, or we'll have the link in the episode notes so you can click on there and check that out. Well, let's not waste any more time. Let's go ahead and join the conversation with today's guest, Erwin McManus.
T-minus 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Erwin, it's always great to have you on the Jumble Think podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh man, so good to be with you.
Well, we had you on a couple years ago, and a lot's changed. COVID's happened. The world around us has shifted, and it sounds like you have been going through a shift too, listening to your podcast and then checking out the new book. There's been some changes in your world. So give us a little update on some things that are happening with you and the shift towards this new direction.
Well, when we're recording this, I'm just a couple of days from turning 65. Wow. So I'm in a pretty big shift in life anyway. And, one of my friends last night was going, "So are you going to retire? What's going on?" And I said, no. I think I'm just, I feel like I'm starting from scratch in a really wonderful way.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, I think a lot of people's life shifted and I think even people's needs shifted.
Right.
And a lot of the topography of the way people are engaging the world around them. And I've always worked in the private sector. I've always worked in the business world, always worked in the educational world. But my public life was always what I've done at MOSAIC, founding MOSAIC and leading this community of faith here in LA and its impact, in some small way around the world. But people didn't realize is that MOSAIC was, self-funded. It was funded by me and my wife.
Wow. Wow.
And so I always think it's funny when people talk about, pastors choosing to go into, this kind of work for the money. I'm like, not in LA, and, not here. Here you it's like a vow of poverty. And then you have to decide to be an entrepreneur outside of that. So just by the nature of what I chose to do with my life, I had to work outside of the church. Pastors work. Let me be very clear. Pastors work and they work hard. And it's definitely a full-time job plus. I just never had that luxury. Yeah. I always had to have a career outside of starting MOSAIC, outside of pastoring, outside of what I did in that space. But I never wanted that career to be my public conversation.
Yeah.
And, but what happened really coming up to the pandemic, well, if you kind of follow my life journey, I go in and out of the public space.
Yes.
Yes. I used to write a lot of books in the faith space and speak a lot around the world in the faith space. And then I disappeared for about 5 or 6 years. And I started a fashion company and a film company and had a tech company and just stopped speaking around the world, stopped writing books. And some of it is, I kind of love anonymity. Wow. And I'm not a person who ever felt comfortable with any level of fame or that sense of celebrity. And so I would always just pull into a different direction. And then when my kids were adults. And my son sent me a text one day and basically challenged me to redirect myself into the church again at a high level. My daughter came to me and basically said, my generation needs you.
Yeah.
And we need your voice.
Yeah.
So my kids who were in their 20s at that time were the ones who really pulled me back into a public ministry.
Wow.
And that's really, what I did for so many years with MOSAIC. And then the pandemic hit. And the reality was that all the work that I did outside of the church was kind of gone, especially in the world of the church. Mm-hmm. There were just no more like church conferences or yep. consulting with groups and working at a high level of thinking in that space. But what really opened up to me pretty tremendously was the world of entrepreneurs. Yeah, I was invited to begin to speak and mentor a lot of people in masterminds, and I didn't even know the mastermind world existed, to be honest with you.
I
wasn't paying attention to it. I wasn't aware of it. One of the business guys that I mentor and invest in, he said, "Hey, would you take 30 minutes and talk to my friend Ed Milet?" And I had no idea who Ed Milet was. I didn't know, he had millions of followers and had grown $1 billion company or whatever it is. And then we became friends, and I ended up going on his podcast, and we had like 6 million downloads. And then other business friends started contacting me, and I didn't even know how deep and expansive my reach was in that world, to be honest with you. Yeah. Because I always kept it very small, very quiet, very private. And it just kept growing and growing. And especially during the pandemic, frankly, entrepreneurs didn't stop during the pandemic.
Oh, no.
They elevated. They basically decided, hey, the government can shut the world down, but we're going to take over the markets. And so I ended up in massive amount of work and in engagements and speaking at these events, and all of them seemingly either underground or in Florida. and I realized, for those of us who live our lives deeply connected to our faith and to Jesus, and our relationship to him, I feel like God is so clearly redirecting my life in a way where it wasn't something I was pursuing. It wasn't, waking up one morning going, I think I'm going to do this. It was waking up one morning going, oh, wow, my life has radically changed. Yeah. A whole new world has opened up for me. Yeah. And now I just need to have the courage and the adaptability to respond to this new opportunity. Yeah. So next thing I knew, I was making my private work my public life, and going public, that I've been an entrepreneur for 30 years, and I think in the business space. I mentor people who are at the highest levels in their domain of work, whether it's sports or fashion or music or business. And I love it. And I'm still doing MOSAIC. So people say, wait a minute. One of my, business friends asked, are you leaving MOSAIC? And I said, no. Now I can give more to MOSAIC. And that makes it very, very exciting to me. Yeah. And then my son, Aaron, who is 35 and he's still single, and he loves the church and he loves serving, but he said, being single, I just don't think ministry is the right space for me at 35. I really rather be in the business world. And so this gave us a chance to work together and to do a lot of personal development and coaching and strategic thinking and creating environments for people outside of the faith. Yeah. And frankly, Michael, and you've been in, both sides of that, line in the business world and in the church world. Yeah. I get to share my faith with more people in the business sector than than most people ever do in their entire lives. Yeah. And through the church. And I get to see so many people come to faith. Yeah. Who are millionaires and billionaires. Oh, yeah. Because of the trust and the relationship and the rapport that we developed together. And they wouldn't respect me or trust me if they didn't feel that I was at the top of the game, know, and they're very competitive. Yeah. They only relate to who they perceive to be the best of the best. Yeah. Yeah. And it's not a forgiving environment.
No.
you know.
I get
And,
that for sure.
it's a shark world, and
Yeah.
I have to be a really, really intelligent porpoise.
Yeah.
and, uh, and I really do love it. It's funny because one day I was complaining, to my wife and saying, "Oh my gosh, these guys just keep calling me. I'm waking up at 6 a.m. from a text from one of them asking me about a business decision, and I'm having to work here and there." And my wife goes, "And you love it, don't you?" And and I said, "I really do. It's just so much fun."
Yeah.
I like working with people who have very, very little margin of error.
Right. Right. And
And go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say, like, I so relate to your story. I think that's part of the reasons why I have looked up to you for so often, because I started my adult life in ministry. And then I ended up in the marketplace because of a recession, and the church couldn't afford to pay me. I kept doing ministry, but, I had to kind of check out and go, hey, how do I pay the bills while I do this? And I always was looking for that person who I go, they get me. And I've always felt, as I've read the book, like your books, and I started out with Barbarian Way and Unstoppable Force, and I have them right back here on the right corner of my bookshelf. One of
Love
them
that.
here.
Thank you so much.
And so, and I just relate to that intertwining of the entrepreneurial spirit while being in a pastoral place, and realizing that maybe the world around us isn't as turned off to the message of Jesus, or into the hope he gives, or even the lessons that we can take as pastors or entrepreneurs to walk people through both the place of business, but also the place of life. And I love in the book how you talk about, there's one gentleman that you met, and you're doing a mastermind.
Wait a minute. Which book?
The Mind Shift book.
Okay, well, don't go on saying the book.
Yeah,
you got an advanced copy of my next book, Mind Shift.
I do.
Comes out October 3rd.
Yeah,
very excited about it.
I love this book, and I have to say, after reading so many of your books, this one feels a lot different. And I just really love it because you tell some great stories. You're a master storyteller, but you also give some practical, like, hey, you've got your mind wrong, get it fixed. And so there's a guy you meet at a conference, or not a conference, but a mastermind, in which he's a high performer, really wealthy, and on paper, his business is great. Things are going well, but there's some things on the personal side that aren't right. And so there's so much of what you're teaching in this book that applies both to the personal and business. So for you, as you lead, as you get into the place where you're walking with these business people, are you experiencing the same thing I'm experiencing when it comes to, like, there's a lot more openness to, like, really doing life together at a deep level that goes beyond the business? And a lot of business people are looking for that.
Yeah, ironically, Michael, what I find is that the business sector is so much more open to the culture and principles of faith than the church is a lot of times.
Me too. I understand that.
Because a lot of times the church becomes a conclave, like a place to hide from the world.
Right.
And it's driven by safety and security and belief and stability. You don't really need a lot of faith.
No.
If you're choosing safety and security and predictability and comfort. But these guys, they're risking everything. They're on the edge every single day. They're giving everything they got. And it's heavy. There's a lot of weight to it.
Yeah.
So they kind of instinctively know they need faith, even when they don't believe in God.
Right.
And so it's misplaced faith. I have faith in myself, like there are a million, like, business mantras to try to give you faith in yourself, but it kind of leaves you a little empty after a while, because you're like, I can do it. And these guys get so exhausted going, I don't know if I can, and then when you go, oh, you're not created to do it by yourself. No. And they go, oh, yeah. That makes a huge difference. And then their marriages are falling apart. And they developed a lot of, like, economic IQ, but they didn't develop a lot of emotional IQ. And then you go, okay, wait a minute. You don't want to die alone. I mean, the first mastermind I ever spoke during the pandemic, I showed up, and all these guys, have multi-million-dollar companies. And my opening line, I think, when I got up there was, I'm not going to teach you how to get rich. All of you are richer than me.
Yeah.
I am going to teach you how not to die alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's just so much openness that I think it's pretty extraordinary. So it's openness to finding health.
Yeah.
But it's also like openness to finding God.
Yes.
And so some of it's pragmatic, like my life's a mess, my marriage is falling apart, I've waited too long, maybe.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this, and I know this is not going to be very popular, but most of the guys that I've met going through a divorce are Christians.
Yeah. So true. It's so true.
And I think it's because they thought, hey, I can go build my $50 million company.
Right.
And we have Jesus, so he'll keep my marriage together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they don't pay attention to basic relational principles.
Right.
That are essential to keep your relationship healthy. And Michael, this is like the reason this book feels differently is that this book is actually how I think.
Interesting. So
it's
when
probably
you say
the closest book.
When you say that, like, this is how I think, unpack that a little bit differently, because like, I think that, we all think that we know more about a person through the osmosis of seeing their posts online or reading their books and that kind of thing. So like when you're approaching a problem, and mind shift is really about approaching the problem of ourselves often. So when you're problem solving and you're saying like, I think more like this book than anything else I've written, what does that mean? Like, that's how I think.
There's several things. One is that anyone who's ever followed me in any way, listen to any conversations I'm in, know that I hate superstitious thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I put every belief, every conviction, every thought through the crucible of practicality, of does it actually work in real life?
Yeah.
And one of the frustrations for me was meeting so many people that I feel are very sincere in their faith. I think they really do love Jesus and they really do trust him with their lives, but they have terribly destructive mental structures.
Okay.
And they never change them because they think believing in Jesus is enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's almost like a crime.
Yeah.
Or heresy to say, you don't just need Jesus, you need to change the way you think.
Right. Right.
And what I found is part of the reason I love the scriptures. Yeah. I love the Bible.
Yeah.
And I don't love it for the same reason I think a lot of times Christians love it.
Okay.
And I think a lot of times like Christians love it because they can go to doctrines that give them comfort.
Yeah.
I love the scriptures because it teaches me how to be fully human.
Right.
And how to be fully alive.
Yeah.
And I extract out of the Bible how to think and in a way where life works.
Yeah.
But what I did with Mind Shift is I extracted it in the way I speak to people in the business world.
Yeah.
And so I'm not assuming they believe the Bible. I'm not assuming they believe in God. I'm not assuming they believe in Jesus. I am assuming they need help.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're trying to figure out how to figure out life.
Yeah.
And, so later in the chapters, I actually mentioned Jesus.
Yes.
And in fact, my daughter is like the pinnacle of faith. Like my daughter is like a Jesus person, just through and through, oozes her faith. And she said, hey, Dad, you're writing a social psychology book. You need to like prepare your audience. You need to help them transition with you or they're going to be really confused.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, and so I've never dedicated a book to Jesus because my life is dedicated to Jesus.
Right. Right.
But this book, if you looked at the dedication, is actually dedicated to Jesus.
I did notice that. Yeah.
And the reason I dedicated it to Jesus is I want people to know just because it's a social psychology book doesn't mean that I shifted the epicenter of my life.
Right.
Like my life is still all about Jesus. Yeah. But what I am going to do is I'm going to translate what I've learned from the wisdom of journeying with him about real life in a way that anyone can access it. And I'm convinced it works backwards. You help a person make sense of their life and they become open to faith.
Yeah. I want to pause there for a second, come back to this, but you mentioned Mariah, who's your daughter, and you're a dad. I'm a dad. I have two daughters, 10 and 6. You are much at a different phase of being
Absolutely.
a father. But just as a person who has watched your podcast and then also seeing the worship that's coming out of MOSAIC, Mariah brings a special and unique voice for this time and for this generation. And I just love when you guys release an album or something, because there is a freshness and newness to that. And she is specifically designed for this season, as is Aaron, and just the conversations you both have. And so father to father, the fruit is there that you have been faithful and done like so much just to raise them up the right way. And it's an encouragement to dads like me who are doing it now, going like, it's possible to raise up our children and be okay, and make it through. And so,
we had tough water, rough waters and tough moments. And it's one of the things I really tried to focus on is that I don't need them to be a certain person for me.
Right. That's so powerful.
And I think a lot of parents, they try to parent their kid based on their own self-image.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my kids don't need to live for my legacy.
Yeah.
They don't need to live for my reputation.
Yeah.
They just need to live for theirs.
Yeah.
And they need to be true to themselves and go through whatever struggles or searches they need to go through. Yeah. And I'm always their dad. I'm always their fan. I'm always for them. Yeah. And it's the reason Kim and I, we've been married 40 years, and our kids Mariah lives probably 4 minutes from us, and Aaron probably lives 8 minutes from us. And they bought houses within driving or walking distance of our house because they wanted to be near us. And I think the best proof of parenting is if your kids want to be your friends when they become adults.
Yeah, that's our goal. And our kids keep saying they want to live by us once they said they don't want to move out. We told them that's not an option, that we're going to encourage them to go. Yeah. One of the things I love in the book that you mentioned, I'm going to quote this because I think it's a powerful statement. You said, "It may sound fair, but it doesn't matter if it's not your fault. It's still your responsibility. No one but you is accountable for your life." And one of the other things that you say early on in the book, just in the forward in the author's notes, is this concept of near life or almost living, or near death and almost dying. And I think the two go together really strongly. There are so many of us that are coming out of COVID or coming out of so much is changing in our society that we've kind of checked out in this season. And that's as a pastor now, it's one of the things with our people that I'm constantly speaking to, you're alive, go live. And so I just want to unpack that with you for a second. Like that's a mindset shift. On truly engaging with the life, the dreams, the ideas, the calling, the purpose, all of those aspects of life. And so for you, as you face that struggle with people at MOSAIC or people in the business space and that limiting belief of fear or even blame on others, how do we process that better? How do we lead people to that place of breakthrough in that?
Yeah, that's a huge motive behind my book, to be honest with you. Is that I feel like we're living in a time, at least in our society, our culture, where we've been given the curse of blame. We are blaming everyone and everything else for the deficits in our lives. Yeah. And, and I'm an immigrant from El Salvador. Yeah. Spanish was my first language. I never knew my real father. My grandparents raised me for the first couple of years of my life. I actually experienced racism. My salary was cut once they realized I was an immigrant when I went to work for a Christian organization.
That's craziness.
Yeah. I mean, I got out of my car one time when driving home in high school because the neighbors shouted an ethnic slur at me and wanting me to get out of the neighborhood.
Wow.
And so I understand all these things. And when I was in college, though, I was offered a scholarship for being an ethnic minority, for being a Latin, Hispanic, and I turned it down. And I was poor. I mean, I paid my way through college. I had no one help me. I was on my own. And when they offered me a scholarship, it was thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And I turned it down because I said, I don't feel it's right to be given a scholarship because of the color of my skin.
Yeah.
Or because of my ethnicity, because I happen to be an immigrant from El Salvador.
Yeah.
And give me a scholarship if I'm smart enough, or if I have a skill or a talent that has value.
Yeah.
But not just because of the chance of my birth.
Yeah.
So I've always had this mindset. And I think my grandparents really gave it to me. They told me no one is to blame for your failure, and no one is responsible for your success.
Yeah. Yeah.
And throughout Mind Shift, each chapter really moves us toward a small granular shift that will radically alter our lives. And, when you hear the language, even in our culture today, of things like white privilege, and, Michael, it's got to be so hard to be a white man right now, because like, you're just like the devil, or the whole language of, rich people with wealth are evil.
Yeah.
And the government is, evil, or there's systemic racism in every institution.
Yeah.
The language is actually a language of passivity that says someone else is to blame for my lack of accomplishment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, you see, the way I was raised was, even if all those things are true, they still can't stop you.
Right. Right.
If you refuse to be stopped.
Right.
And so to me, Mind Shift is really, hey, the world is unfair.
Yeah.
Like, the world is unjust.
Yeah.
There isn't equality. There is racism. There is stuff.
Yeah.
That's actually the real world.
Yeah.
And so what are you going to do now?
Yeah.
If you take responsibility, no one has power over you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember for me, I grew up, we were told that you're going to succeed. That was the requirement. And they didn't care where you succeeded. They just said, where are you going? And I was, at a young age, I struggled in kindergarten and first grade. And I remember, for me personally, getting put into class with the bad kids because I didn't learn the same way. And I was told, well, you're just a bad kid. So I was there, and my parents really advocated for me. And it was really amazing to see that fruit. And they said, well, actually, it has to do with the fact that you're teaching him in a way that he doesn't learn. And so they adjusted in the school. And I remember I graduated high school, and I had gotten to excelled classes and graduated really well. And I remember going to college and my mom saying, hey, remember, you have that learning disability. You can use that to your advantage, whether it's in test taking and stuff like that. And I just went, that's not my identity. I'm not going to accept that. I'm not going to take that in. That's not who I am. And so I never mentioned that to the college that I went to. And it was like, I'm going to work a little bit harder. I'm going to have to adjust, but I've been given the tools and the resources to say, this is on me. This isn't on anyone else. And I think I agree with you so much that this is a struggle that, like, we aren't all victims. And I think that they're in that question of inclusion and diversity, like, as we try to make everything where everyone gets exactly the same thing, we dilute the value of the beauty of that individual. We dilute the value of, like, the uniqueness and the power and the strength in them by making everyone average. And you even talk about that. You say about be average in most things, but excellent in some.
Yeah. One of my favorite chapters is a chapter that deals with the mind shift of you are your own ceiling.
Yes. Yeah.
And when you begin to recognize the fact that regardless of how much opposition you have, regardless of how many obstacles you have to face, that in the end, you are your own ceiling.
Yeah.
And we have the great advantage, especially in this nation and most of the world where there's at least some modicum of freedom. You can create the life that you desire. Now, I understand there are places in the world where opportunities are rare.
Yeah.
And people are struggling to survive. But you cannot use that as an excuse for you.
Yeah.
And in fact, what I find is when I travel the world, because my wife works in Malawi quite a bit, we built a school there, we're building houses there. Most of those people who have so little, they see themselves as having so much opportunity, and they see themselves as being resplendent with possibilities. And if a lot of us had their sense of optimism and determination, we'd be blowing the ceiling off of our lives.
Yeah. I so agree with that. And I'm constantly talking to my team just about like, where are you pushing yourself? Where are you uncomfortable? Push into being uncomfortable. I'm going to ask a question for my own benefit for a second, but I think it's going to apply to many other people. Probably all of our listeners really identify with this. You are super busy. You are doing a lot. I was just watching you on GLS like a couple of weeks ago, and then you're in South America, and then you're in Mexico, and then you're in LA, and then you're working on this project with fashion, and you're doing that. And I wrote it down. You're doing MOSAIC. You're leading that. You are writing constantly. You just launched the Arena, which is pretty phenomenal. We need to talk about that in a second. Awesome. Fashion, the podcast, coaching and consulting, over a half dozen businesses. You're doing masterminds. There's even things that are on the horizon that haven't been announced. And I get it. Like I'm in school right now. I'm pastoring a campus. I'm running my business still at a high level, doing the podcast. And I relate to that, but I often struggle like with that sense of balance and like what I'm doing. And just like I'm always going, never stopping, never resting, never in that place. How do you navigate that? Because you address that a little bit in the book too.
Yeah. Well, I love my daughter's advice. She just keeps saying to me, Dad, remember, only do the things you care about. Just do the things you want to do.
Yeah.
And she knows me, and I do a lot of things out of obligation. I do a lot of things because other people need me to. Yeah. And, she's sort of like my watchdog of going, make sure that it's what you feel you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And I think that people do not have the same amount of energy. And I had to accept that years ago.
Yeah.
I have these psychological assessments I use, and I can actually measure how much physical energy a person has.
Wow.
And social energy, emotional energy. And my like physical energy is in the top like 1 percentile.
Yeah.
And so I had to realize early on that people look really lazy to me. And
I feel that way too. I'm sorry, I do. I agree.
And I just had to accept the fact that most people don't have the same amount of energy, and I shouldn't measure them based on how much energy I have.
Yeah.
But I'm responsible.
Yeah.
For how much energy I have.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something that's like a God-given gift.
Yeah.
And so for me to do less than someone who has less energy is really, for me, it would be unethical. And then I have a lot of things that are either fascinating to me, I'm passionate about, or I feel that they won't happen unless I do them.
Yeah.
And that's always been sort of my prayer is, God, let me do the things that no one can do or no one will do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how I've kind of crafted my life. I started MOSAIC in Hollywood because it was two things. It was something that no one seemed to want to do.
Yeah.
And something it seemed like no one could do.
Yeah.
And so I took this on because it was the hardest place probably in America to create a community of faith that was open about Jesus and believed the scriptures, and one of the most, liberal, epicenters in the world. And so I chose that very specifically. It would have been much easier to do something else and to do the same thing somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so it's the same way with like the Arena. Working one-on-one with people and working with a mastermind, 2 masterminds, and or actually more than that. But I began to realize that, when I coach at the highest level, it's a 6-figure relationship, and very few people can afford that. But it's a highly intensive, low margin of error relationship.
Yeah.
And then the mastermind that I lead, it's expensive. It's like $30,000 a year.
Yeah.
And so it allows a certain kind of person to be in that room with their peers. Mm-hmm. And they're able to then be more open and to be more vulnerable and to have a higher learning posture because they're just dealing with different issues that other people are not.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, there's no one in the world doing a mastermind that's online, that's actually dynamic, that's more affordable. And so we felt like the arena was like blue ocean. It doesn't exist, and not many people could create it.
Yeah.
Because I kind of like, I live in all those sectors. I live in the world of business, and I live in the world of faith, and I work in the world of personal development and character development, and also strategic thinking. And so I'm able to create a different kind of world with the arena. And then, someone asked me, well, it's still pretty expensive because it's like $4,000 a year. So it's fairly expensive. Yeah. And I said, and someone said, hey, what about us who are just starting? And I go, the arena isn't for you. It's like, you wouldn't take a master's degree and put it in 5th grade. And you want to create a space for people who are dealing with really serious growth, leadership, communication issues, and they want to become and need to become the best of the best. Yeah. So the way I factor things is it something I love? I love designing clothes. I know it's not going to change the world, not going to make the world dramatically better. But when I started designing clothes, I did it because I felt like fashion was making our boys effeminate. And there wasn't really a lot of brands that pushed masculinity as a positive virtue. Yeah. And so when I started my first brand, my theme was heroism as a style. And so I understand that fashion translates values and expands culture. So I wanted to have a small fingerprint in fashion that actually said, hey, I want to create really cool cutting edge clothes for men that says, hey, I'm edgy, but I'm a man, I'm masculine. Yeah. And so, that was actually my intention. So there's always a subtle intention behind everything I do. And that's how I choose it. And I have enough energy because I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, one of the things you talk about in the book that I think dovetails with this so well, that I think is a really important part, is like you mentioned about the elements of obligation for your job, for the things that you do, that there is an element that there are things that you simply probably wouldn't choose to do, but the role requires it. And you talk about bitterness as a poison. And I know I struggle with that as a leader often, where, I try really hard to keep that optimism that you talk about, that right perspective, but like, it's really easy to get where you find that little seed of something that bothers you, or something that you feel like, it's really not my job. It's not my responsibility. It's someone else should be doing this. And it's so easy to have that switch between like the joy factor and like the, what in the world am I doing here? Place. So like, talk to us a little bit about that and how to navigate keeping our heart and our mind right in that.
Yeah. There are things I struggle with, but bitterness isn't one of them.
Okay.
And in fact, I was just working with this company, and they missed our appointment, I think 3 times.
Wow.
CEO reached out to me, was super apologetic. And I think he was really worried. And I said, I just texted back, don't worry, it's virtually impossible to offend me. And he said, thank you so much. And I just years ago realized, when you're offended, it's at least a small indicator of arrogance.
Yeah.
Of pride, because
interesting.
You feel like people treated you beneath your value or your stature.
Wow.
And so I just always told myself, try to choose like a path of humility where it's impossible to offend you.
Yeah.
And then also sometimes bitterness is because you assume ill intent or bad motives from the other person.
Wow.
And because if you assumed the best motive, you wouldn't be bitter. You wouldn't be offended. Yeah. And so when they didn't make the meetings 3 times, I thought, wow, really important things must have come up.
Yeah.
Wow, for them to miss 3 meetings, they must be overwhelmed and swamped. Yeah. And so I just try to never impose negative motive on another human being. Yeah. You have to convince me that you're trying to offend me. And then I think the third thing for me is that I know that whatever I become embittered toward, I become like.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So bitterness binds you to the negative behavior of the person that offended you.
Wow.
And you'll become like them.
Yeah.
Because that's what bitterness does. It binds you to that emotional frequency.
Yeah.
And I just go, I don't want to become that.
Yeah.
And so I just refuse to have that in my life. one of the things, and my kids will verify this, and so will my wife, but odd thing is that if you really, really profoundly like hurt me, like, because I've had betrayal.
Yeah.
I've had some pretty significant deep wounds in my life. I so let it go that I forget the person. And because I have a neurological issue anyway, I don't have chronological memory the way other people do. And I remember one time I was in an airport in Europe somewhere, and this guy comes up to me who really did something horrific, and years before, and he came up and he was super apologetic and was like asking for forgiveness. And I said, "Hey, I'm so sorry. Could you tell me your name?" And he told me his name, and I remembered him, and I'm like, "How could I forget him? Like he was in my home, like it was but like I just let go of bitterness, and then I forget like that negative memory." I have people 10, 15 years later email me or send me a note going, "Please forgive me for what I did, 10 years ago." And I don't remember what they did. And I'll usually text them back and I'll go, "I can't remember what you did."
Right.
But you need to forgive yourself because I forgave you 10 years ago.
Wow.
Like, and I'll say, "I'm so sad that you've carried that emotion for so long. If you had just asked for forgiveness right away, you would have been free. I've been free all these years."
Yeah.
And when you're bitter, you're not free.
Yeah.
And so I just try to encourage people, look, if you offend someone, ask for forgiveness fast and mean it so that you can be free.
Yeah.
And if someone offends you, like, let it go as fast as you can, so that you can be free of it. And I think powerful. Bitterness is a poison, and it'll destroy you. It's a liar. Bitterness feels like power. Yeah. And that's why people choose it.
Yeah.
Bitterness makes you feel powerful, and forgiveness makes you feel vulnerable. And we do not like the feeling of vulnerability that we could be hurt again.
Yeah.
And so then we become hardened through bitterness, and we feel that we are now impossible to hurt. But what it also does, you may become impossible to hurt. You're also impossible to experience love and forgiveness and joy and your full humanity.
Wow. So powerful. And something I can take to heart personally in areas of my life, because I think, when you care deeply by people, it's easy to be hurt deeply. And I'm sure you've encountered that where you've so believed in someone and just been disappointed by the outcome. And I think one area in our culture right now where we're struggling with is leadership as a whole. I think of how many pastors, how many famous people, that doesn't matter at all levels. There are so many people failing. And I remember you announcing on Instagram, "Hey, I have something to share with everyone." And I remember seeing that going, well, if it's that important, I need to hear what everyone has to say. And I remember watching it and that there's that whole side of dread where it's like, did another leader fail? And I remember watching and seeing you get into it, and you go, "I'm not okay. I have cancer and I'm dealing with that." And it was so sad for me to feel like relief on that like, here's somebody that in leadership I look up to, and I have a high respect for. And I was set up for disappointment because I've seen so many people in leadership fail. And as a leader who leads in many aspects of life, how do you keep that place of purity, of consistency, of that place of staying on vision and on point, and not distracted? Because I think we have a focus issue that often pulls us away from our vision or our purpose as we walk through life.
Well, I think that a part of the problem is our culture. I mean, the fact, Michael, if I could just be straight up, like the fact that you were relieved that I had cancer, so I might die, was actually more relieving than if I'd had an affair, so I might not meet your standards.
Right.
Is a part of the problem with Christianity.
Yeah.
Is that we need leaders to be so exceptional that they lie to us their whole lives. Yeah. And a huge part of it is, and I've graphed a lot of leaders psychologically, and my background is in that world as a social psychologist, and most megachurch pastors are like CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, or founders of those companies, and they're all basically narcissists.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a condescending or condemning way. I mean, they have the psychological structures of a narcissistic personality.
Yeah.
And then we go, yeah, we knew they were narcissists. No, what we need to realize is that's who Christians are drawn to.
Wow.
You see, so we go, yeah, we blame him because he's a narcissist. And I go, no, there's a reason 20,000 people are in that building is that they're drawn toward a narcissistic personality structure.
Yeah.
And so my bigger concern hasn't been, why do pastors keep messing up? My question is, why is Christianity so drawn to that kind of personality and that style of leadership?
Yeah.
Because it would only be successful and effective if that's what we want.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember years ago, I met with one of, I guess she was Oprah's main producer, and we were looking at doing a TV show. And she said to me, look, to succeed in television, you either need to be flamboyant or authentic. And she goes, and your problem is that you're authentic, but not flamboyant at all. And flamboyant has a better chance of succeeding.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember, and she was not a Christian. And I remember asking her, I said, do you think that's why Christian television is so flamboyant? And she goes, that's exactly why Christian television.
Wow.
And, you know, there's a reason. I mean, I've been offered for years and years and years, you know, to be on Christian television. But when you look at the culture of Christian communicators across the board, they're flamboyant.
Yeah.
And the frequency of Christian communication is inauthentic. Yeah. And I know it's not popular for me to say that, but I'm just going to say it. And the level of inauthenticity that American Christianity is drawn to is terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think the reason there's so much moral collapse among leaders is that there's no room for them to be authentic when they're 18 years old or 25 years old.
Yeah.
They have to fake it to be promoted. And then we promote their talent, and we don't really care about their character. We care about their reputation. Yeah. There's a difference. Yeah. And then when their reputation falls, we think it's that their character fell, but it's not. Yeah. Their character was always like that. Yeah. Yeah. But
it
now
just got revealed.
Yeah. And so we have to realize we loved that guy yesterday. Yeah. Before we knew that. Yeah. So we need to realize we're actually drawn to a frequency of inauthenticity. Wow. That is incredibly unhealthy. Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, so I did announce I had cancer, and I've been married 40 years and I've never had an affair. And, you know, and my life, you know, in terms of like those things I've been a pretty boring person. You know, I'm not a person who drinks or smokes or does drugs or, you know, I'm not tatted up, you know, even though I have no problems with tattoos and stuff. Yeah. I have no problem with people who drink. I have no problem but it isn't me. Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, but before I was a Christian, I was a moral person. And so I look at it and go, it's not even your faith. It's not my faith that kept me moral. It's that I love my wife more than I love myself. Yeah. And I love my kids more than I love me. Yeah. And when you love someone else more than you love yourself, you make decisions based on their best good, not just on your own best good or your own personal pleasure. Yeah. I married a girl who was an orphan, who never heard I love you from the age of 8 to 18, and living in a foster home. And I considered it a privilege to love her. And for me, like, to be unfaithful to her would be such a devastating statement to her that she wasn't worthy of love. I just couldn't do that. Yeah. And, you know, my son, I wanted him to know that a man can be faithful. Yeah. And he would never believe that if I was unfaithful. I wanted my daughter to be able to believe that a man would be faithful to her. And I'm going more intimately in this, but like, for me, it isn't about my reputation in Christianity. And it isn't about, you know, letting people down as a pastor. It's very personal for me. It's about Kim and Aaron and Mariah, you know, and I carry the weight of it as a pastor. I really do. Yeah. But I carry the weight of the fact that you can't ever live a good enough life for people. Right. Like, you know, I mean, I've been called a heretic. I've had Christians set up websites where they're going to kill me. I mean, I've been through all of that. I've had people put things online that were completely untrue.
Yeah.
If you live your life for the perception of others, you're just dead.
Yeah.
You have to live your life for the people who are closest to you.
Yeah.
And if you can look at them and know that you've been trustworthy, and if they can look at you and respect and love you and trust you, I feel like, at the end of the day, you're going to be okay.
Yeah. So as we kind of move towards the end of this conversation, there's a lot of great stuff that's happening. I love Mind Shift. The book has a lot of powerful insights, and I think it's a great start for people who are reshaping how they think about themselves and how they perceive the world. But then you also have Arena, which is a phenomenal program. I've been praying and thinking about, is this the right mastermind? I was a part of masterminds for years and years, love them. And they've impacted my life, and you've impacted my life in so many ways. And so I'm excited about what you're doing there. How can people connect with these things? How can they find out more and get involved?
I think the easiest thing is to go to my website, to erwinmcmanus.com, or go to my Instagram account. And there's usually a link there for the Arena or the different things we're doing for the book Mind Shift. I think that the Arena is a great place if someone wants to be a part of a futuristic learning community. The best way I could describe this is it's the university for entrepreneurs. When you go to school, you look back and you realize 90% of what you learned in school was completely irrelevant to success or failure in your life.
Yeah.
And what we have to do is create an entirely new paradigm for education. And the Arena is where adults, to me, are going to learn in the future. And we're focusing on communication, leadership, character, and big ideas, because I want to have a place we can talk about philosophy and theology, leadership and culture, politics, and the environment. Whatever the conversation was, I wanted to have a place where we could bang around big ideas and then have a learning community where really sharp people could be helping each other as well. So it's probably the most exciting thing I've created since MOSAIC. Wow. Since launching MOSAIC, I feel like the Arena is going to transform adult learning. And so I'm so deeply committed. Mind Shift, it would just be, I would really appreciate for people to get the word out. I think it's going to be such an impactful book. And the great danger of this book for me is that the people who know me will go, wait a minute, it's not a faith book. But I need not only people who believe in Jesus to realize this book I think is transformative. It will change your life. Yeah. It will destroy the internal limitations inside of your soul. And it's very exciting to me, but it's also the perfect book to give to people who don't have faith. Yeah. And because I did it backwards. Mind Shift is John the Baptist, and the genius of Jesus is actually Jesus. It's like, I wrote the book, The Genius of Jesus. And I think when people read a book and are impacted by it, then they look at the author's backlist. Yeah. And for me, it's exciting to think people will read Mind Shift, which is a very fast read. Yeah, it is. And I just did the audiobook in 4 hours. and when but it's like Red Bull. Every shift is transformative in a person's life. And then if people then want to pick up more, then they can go to The Genius of Jesus, which to me is the book that really opens up who Jesus is to people who don't have faith. So I'm very excited about it. And I think this is going to be the most exciting year in my life. I'm so looking forward to 65. That's so cool. And the best years are yet ahead, I'm sure, for you. And I love being able to watch this journey that you've been on. And I know it's spoken to my life. I have a lot of friends that it's spoken to their life. And so I just, as a little guy over here in Northern Illinois, I just want to say your life has been a beacon of hope to those who might feel a little outside the norm when it comes to how the church views Christianity or even how the church views community. And I want to say thank you so much for what you have meant to not only me, but to my generation. I'm 40, I'm 42. Right? Is that how old I am? We'll go with 42. It's close enough. And I know that
I talk to friends, I talk to other leaders, and they've read your books. That it's not just about like, hey, here's the celebrity guy, but just really feeling like there's a leader who gets us. And I just want to say thank you for getting us and being willing to have conversations that might not be typical. And that authenticity you talk to, it's just so powerful. I just want to say thank you for that.
Hey, thank you so much. And Michael, thanks so much for having me.
Well, once again, I want to thank our friend Erwin McManus for stopping by and joining us for today's conversation. I love his stuff. I love what he's doing, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you did, go check out erwinmcmanus.com. Go get the book. Right here it is. It is Mind Shift. It doesn't take a genius to think like one. And go check out The Arena. You can do that all by going to erwinmcmanus.com. Well, we have a great conversation lined up for you next week. Our guest is Shelley Herman. She's an Emmy-nominated showbiz veteran, and she's a longtime host, a writer, a producer. She's doing a lot of cool stuff. She has a new book out called My Peacock Tale, The Secrets of an NBC Page, where she shares her stories and stories of other pages, the people that keep Hollywood going on those studio lots. She was back on the lots of NBC back in the 1970s. So lots of fun stories from Johnny Carson to just game show world and beyond. You're not going to want to miss that. So tune on back in for that next Tuesday. Well, there is a lot happening at Jumblethink, and I just want to encourage you, check out what we're doing. Head on over to jumblethink.com. You can subscribe to our newsletter. You can connect up. And more importantly, I hope that you would just like and subscribe right now to our show wherever you are listening. Hey, thanks again for tuning in to the Jumblethink podcast. Now it's your turn to get out there, to dream big, and to change the world around you.
Lorsque vous aurez bien saisi la technique et que vous serez maître de votre corps, vous pourrez vous décontracter même en travaillant.